For the first time in many years, Russia has recorded a decrease in the consumption of staple food products. This was reported by the Center for Countering Disinformation under the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine. And according to the center, the problems in the Russian economy caused by the war and international sanctions have led to a reduction in food consumption. In particular, there has been a decline in the consumption of meat, certain grains, and milk by the population. Due to the rapid rise in food prices, even with supposedly higher incomes, Russians can afford less.
While Russian propaganda tries to convince Russian citizens that their real incomes are supposedly growing and that the economy, despite sanctions, is in good shape, in reality, ordinary Russians are literally being forced to tighten their belts. The only reason for the worsening living conditions of Russians is the ongoing war against Ukraine, which demands ever-increasing expenditures that the Kremlin extracts from the pockets of its own people. From a report by the Center for Countering Disinformation under the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine on Telegram,
cutting back on food has become the norm in Russia. This is also confirmed by the Ukrainian Foreign Intelligence Service. A third of Russians admit that they have to limit themselves when buying groceries. Shoppers are being forced to switch from mid-priced goods to cheaper and often much lower quality products. Discount stores, chains that offer the cheapest goods, are benefiting from this. Their share of the Russian market has already exceeded 60%. My colleague Victoria Chistukina will continue on this topic.
Russia's economy is slowing down rapidly. According to the July forecast by the International Monetary Fund, by the end of 2025, Russia's GDP growth will slow to 0.9% and in 2026 to 1%. For comparison, in 2024 the figure was 4%. But the head of the central bank, Nabulina, insists that talk of a recession is inappropriate. She called on State Duma deputies to, I quote, be responsible with their statements. The deputies in turn tried to find those to blame for the crisis. Although the reasons are obvious, Russia's war against Ukraine is eating up about half of the federal budget. And sanctions, Ukrainian drone strikes, and international isolation prevent recovery and development.
Where is personal responsibility? With all these proposals, the main personal responsibility gets blurred.
Of course, the chairman of the State Duma does not consider himself responsible for the economic collapse. But even official statistics can no longer hide the symptoms of catastrophe.
However, it is not just one sector that is in a dire state, but many. According to calculations by the Center for Macroeconomic Analysis and Short-Term Forecasting, production in the civilian manufacturing sectors, excluding industries dominated by defense production, has been rapidly declining since the beginning of the year. From January to August, output in these sectors has already dropped by 5.4%. In the language of economists, what is being observed in Russian industry is called a frontal decline, comments former first deputy chairman of the central bank Sergei Alexashenko on the latest Rosstat report. Everyone is dancing, that is, falling compared to the first 9 months of last year, except for tobacco product manufacturers, textile producers, and those sectors where statistics hide military production, according to a publication by the Moscow Times.
Experts note that the economy hasn't just cooled down, it has frozen. The situation is especially critical in the coal industry, which until recently was one of the main sources of foreign currency revenue for the budget. Here, the share of unprofitable companies has risen to 67%. The industry's profits have been cut in half, while losses have surged 2.5 times.
The credit market, which should serve as an indicator of trust, is showing the opposite. The share of problematic borrowers among legal entities has reached 23%, and about 165,000 companies are already unable to service their debts. This is a signal that the corporate sector has lost its financial stability. From a statement on the website of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine,
to patch the hole in the budget, the government has even decided to issue yuan-denominated bonds on the domestic market.
The deficit in the budget, in fact, is growing. It's enormous. 5,700 billion rubles, according to the forecast, the October forecast from the Ministry of Finance, the budget deficit for the current year. Last year, when passing the law, they promised a deficit of 1.2 trillion for this year, but they missed the mark by 5 times. Wonderful economists at the central bank, the Ministry of Finance, and the Ministry of Economic Development. Putin has them, and now they're trying to borrow money somewhere.
Now the Ministry of Finance is looking for options, who to sell UN-denominated securities to, and how. Moscow has been trying for a long time to reach an agreement with Beijing on loans and investments in the Russian economy, but so far without success.
Negotiations went on for 10 years so that Chinese investors could directly buy Russian federal loan bonds. Ideally, they should be offered some attractive yield and at the same time replace the money that used to come from America and Europe, which, let's say, allowed the Ministry of Finance to increase the national debt and attract budget financing. That didn't happen. The Chinese never set up any bridge, any gateway.
Russians are feeling the consequences of the Kremlin's policies. People in Russia have started eating less. Statistics bear this out. In September and October, food sales in the Federation dropped by 5%. And it's no wonder, given how often price tags change in stores. Since the beginning of 2024, potatoes, for example, have gone up in price by 167%. Beef by 26%, milk by 25%, rye bread by 24%. In other words, the total bill is increasing, but the number of purchases is going down.
Potatoes used to cost 27 rubles per kilo, now it's 45.
31% of Russians say they don't have enough money for food. This is the highest figure in 4 years. And next year, citizens of the Federation will also face an increase in VAT. For the market, this will mean a drop in demand and a new round of inflation. And for the population, even stricter saving measures.
Investors are actively investing in Ukrainian companies that are developing drones and defense technologies. Thus, Western funds have increased their investments in Ukrainian startups, reports the Wall Street Journal. This helps them expand their presence in international markets. One of the largest deals was an investment in a Kyiv-based company. It raised $15 million to develop technologies for coordinating drone attacks. Experts predict that after the war ends, Ukrainian companies in the drone sector will gain enormous growth potential and their technologies will be in demand worldwide. Turkey's largest oil refineries have started purchasing more non-Russian oil. This was reported by Reuters. This happened after the latest sanctions were imposed against Moscow. A Turkish refinery owned by the Azerbaijani company Sokar has purchased 4 batches of oil from Iraq, Kazakhstan, and other producing countries. Last month, this refinery primarily used Russian oil. But now, the share of non-Russian oil in processing will increase to 120,000 barrels per day. Another major Turkish refinery, Tüpraş, plans to stop purchasing Russian oil for one of its plants in order to maintain fuel exports to Europe. Turkey is ready to once again act as a mediator in peace negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. This was stated by Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan. According to him, Ankara could host a 4th round as well as a potential leaders' summit in Istanbul. Fidan emphasized that Turkey will continue to support diplomatic efforts to achieve peace and is ready to provide its platform for direct negotiations between Kiev and Moscow.
3 rounds of negotiations between the Russian and Ukrainian delegations in Istanbul led to tangible results, in particular to prisoner exchanges and the resumption of direct dialogue between the sides. We sincerely believe that diplomacy remains the only way to a peaceful resolution of the war in Ukraine. Hakan Fidan, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Turkey, during his speech at the TRT World Forum.
Ukraine has repeatedly stated its readiness for realistic negotiations with Russia at any time in any country. This was stated by Mikhailo Podolyak, advisor to the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, on the Freedom TV channel. However, according to him, such meetings are better held at the level of leaders, because only then is it possible to reach any decisions. As a rule, Russia sends fictitious delegations to the negotiations.
The platform in Turkey made it possible to resolve several humanitarian issues, meaning an increase in the number of prisoner exchanges, exchanges of bodies, and so on. But there have been no significant breakthroughs. Nevertheless, Turkey is always truly ready to act as a powerful organizer, a strong logistics provider, and that's very good. That is, Turkey is interested, given its fundamental interest in peace in the region and its interest in the Black Sea area. Undoubtedly, Turkey is ready at any moment to organize the negotiation process as quickly and efficiently as possible. So another point, let me return to it and sum up here. First, Russia is not ready for a real negotiation process. Second, it is not ready to stop the war. And third, for Putin to stop living in this painful reality that he is immersed in and frankly loves: mass violence.
At present, there is no need for a meeting between the Russian dictator Putin and US President Donald Trump to resolve the war in Ukraine. This was stated by Kremlin spokesperson Peskov to Russian media. At the same time, he added that right now there is a need, as he put it again, Peskov said, a very painstaking work on the details. Problems of settlement. Let me remind you that earlier, Donald Trump announced his intention to hold a personal meeting with Putin in Budapest. It was supposed to be coordinated by U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov. However, after their very first phone conversation, Trump canceled the summit with Putin himself. Meanwhile, the US and China have agreed to establish a direct line between their armed forces to prevent possible conflicts. This was reported by Pentagon Chief Pete Hegseth after a conversation with China's Minister of National Defense Dong Jun. According to Hegseth, both sides agreed to create military communication channels to de-escalate conflicts and prevent new problems. Peace, stability, and good relations are the best way forward, Hegseth emphasized. The governments of the US and China will continue negotiations to clarify the details of establishing such communication channels.